When Donald Trump was in college, happily avoiding the military draft for the war in Vietnam, the most famous cabinet secretary in Lyndon Johnson's cabinet was the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara's service in the cabinet ended, as Scott Bessent's will, in total failure. That's where Donald Trump saw those glasses, on Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara was wrong about the war in Vietnam, and Scott Bessent is wrong, as far as we can tell, about everything. Scott Bessent may look the part in Donald Trump's mind, but his personal and professional resume are not what fanatical Trump supporters would have been hoping for in a Treasury Secretary. Fanatical Trump supporters would expect to find a gay man married to a man and raising two children together after having worked for George Soros in the Obama cabinet or the Biden cabinet. But there he is, with his Robert McNamara glasses in the Trump cabinet. He solidified his position in history today as the most ignorant Treasury Secretary since oil was discovered on planet Earth in 1859, when he said this.
We got a spike in oil prices today that I don't really understand.
Every single American who paid more for gasoline today knows they paid more for gasoline today because of Donald Trump's war in Iran, which Scott Bessent, who never served a day in the military, so enthusiastically supports, but apparently does not understand, and does not understand what that war does to oil prices. When Robert McNamara was busy losing the Vietnam War every day in the 1960s, members of the Johnson administration kept talking about the light at the end of the tunnel, which they may have believed when they first started using the phrase. In 1965, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., American ambassador to South Vietnam, wrote this assessment of the war to President Johnson. It will be straightforward, if slow, plowing ahead, with the light at the end of the tunnel growing brighter all the time. That was 1965. The American military and Defense Department didn't really know what they were doing in Vietnam in 1965, but they also could have been guessing wrong about the light at the end of the tunnel. A year later, in 1966, President Johnson said in a speech, Americans often grow impatient when they cannot see light at the end of the tunnel. And by that time, Lyndon Johnson was becoming impatient with impatient young Americans who were beginning to protest, loudly protest, being sent off to a war that seemed pointless. But a year later, the light at the end of the tunnel had dimmed to the point that by 1967, Treasury Secretary Douglas Dillon said, we must give some hope that there is a possibility in the next 2 or 3 years of seeing light at the end of the tunnel. By 1967, Vietnam felt like a forever war, and the Treasury Secretary was saying, if we could just say that it would be over in 2 or 3 years, people would support us. It took years for the people in authority in American government to stop believing in the light at the end of the tunnel in the Vietnam War. Donald Trump's phrasing for the light at the end of the tunnel in his Iran war has been 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 weeks, any day now. Donald Trump has predicted the end of his war in a couple of days for more times than anyone can remember, and he's been wrong every single time. And today, Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary gave this time estimate for Donald Trump's war.
This Iran conflict, we will get on the other side of this. We don't know when.
We don't know when. That's a lot worse than Lyndon Johnson's Treasury Secretary saying 2 or 3 years. We don't know when is the very definition of a forever war. And so Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary did him the favor today of, in effect, declaring Donald Trump's war in Iran to be taking its place in the list of America's forever wars in that region in the 21st century. That's what Donald Trump's central casting Treasury Secretary did for him and his war today. And while he was at it, Scott Bessent became the only Republican Treasury Secretary in history to show absolutely no concern whatsoever about the national debt on a day when it hit a new historic high, a Trump-achieved high of $40 trillion. In his first 100 days in the White House, Donald Trump said he would, quote, pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. And since that day, Donald Trump has paid up the national debt, increased the national debt by $3.8 trillion. Donald Trump and Scott Bessent managed to increase the national debt by more than 10% and push it up over $40 trillion. And then keep waging a very expensive war in Iran that is pushing the national debt up every single day with no end in sight. That's what Scott Bessent said today. No end in sight for Donald Trump's war. Yesterday, Donald Trump announced a vague outline for new sanctions against Iran, saying this will be an economic D-Day. The real D-Day was the deadliest day for American military in World War II, with 2,501 American war dead, with an additional almost 2,000 Allied soldiers, mostly from Britain and Canada, lying on the beaches that day beside their American comrades in arms. A total of 4,414 dead, just on our side of the D-Day invasion. How stupid do you have to be to say that something in a live television interview, and then say, don't quote me? Donald Trump's central casting Treasury Secretary managed to do that today in a live television interview, saying something, then saying, don't quote me, when he suggested the economy could achieve 4% economic growth, and then immediately said, don't quote me. Okay, Scott, we won't. But we will quote you about something else. And this is the quote that will follow you around for the rest of your life. As the light at the end of the tunnel quotes during the Vietnam War followed everyone who ever said them for the rest of their haunted lives. Here is what Scott Bessent said about what Donald Trump is calling economic D-Day for Iran.
We are going to squash the economy of this murderous regime. It is going to work in Iran, and we are going to collapse this regime.
We're going to collapse this regime. The man who says he has no idea how long the war he is so enthusiastic about is going to last says with confidence, we are going to collapse this regime. By the end of 1967, Robert McNamara was in agony over the mistaken calculations he had made about the Vietnam War over the previous 4 years, and he just couldn't take it anymore. He resigned, and he spent the rest of his life a defeated man, a haunted man. Robert McNamara spent the rest of his life sorry for being so wrong and being part of the leadership that sent, in the end, a total of 58,220 Americans to their deaths for no reason in Vietnam. Robert McNamara at least had the decency to be haunted by that. We should not expect such decency from Scott Bessent. On October 23rd, 1966, when Lyndon Johnson and most of the people in his administration, including Robert McNamara, were still desperately hoping to somehow win the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army's commanding general in Vietnam, William Westmoreland, said, according to notes of a meeting in the Philippines, quote, while there was light at the end of the tunnel, we had to be geared for the long pull. The enemy is relying on his greater staying power. It is only his will and resolve that are sustaining him now, and his faith that his will is stronger than ours. His will was stronger than ours. The North Vietnamese army beat the United States Army in Vietnam because their will was stronger than ours. And whose will seems stronger tonight in Donald Trump's war in Iran? Iran's foreign minister said this today on Elon Musk's